However, it doesn't always have to be negative. I'm always very interested about what people go to for comfort food, because a lot of times it's the food that maybe our parents or a loved one would bring us if we were sad or if it was raining or something like that. So for me, my mom grew up in the Midwest, and so it's a lot of things like mashed potatoes or mac and cheese or these like creamy, carby things. But a lot of my friends and a lot of my students seek out different kinds of stuff. For my best friend is Pakistani, and so for her, it's these curries and samosas and all these things that I wouldn't normally turn to for comfort. But for her, it's like, yeah, that's what me and my family ate or that's what my mom made me when I was sad. And so it shows just the variety of contexts and how that could be established early on to help develop our preferences. Context is super important, not just our personal context, but how information is presented to us, which is why a lot of people calling out different schools for the way that they present, let's say, history, whitewashed history, which people are talking about a lot because of what's going on. But also media outlets and how they present certain situations, the language they use to present to read the news, or the images that they show when delivering the news. And something people are really angry about is the incredible bias that's displayed with pictures of victims or aggressors in violent crimes. So two names that you're probably familiar with, Brock Turner and Trayvon Martin. So on the left is Brock Turner, and on the right is Trayvon Martin. Brock Turner, when in 2015, I think, was caught in the act of raping an unconscious woman, and the court cases were very frustrating. He eventually only served something like 3 months. But this is the photo that they showed on the news the night that it happened, and it was disseminated throughout different news outlets. As a contrast, Trayvon Martin was an innocent boy who was murdered by George Zimmerman after just buying Skittles at the store. And this is the photo that the news chose to use. And there's a very stark difference. Brock Turner, who is the aggressor and the criminal, is wearing a suit. He's smiling hugely. It's a professional photo. He looks like just a nice, good young man. Whereas Trayvon Martin, who was a boy and an innocent, is shown from a different angle, looking down. His face is shadowed. He's wearing a hood. It's not professional at all. He's not smiling. So we have the idea of like, oh, maybe he was, violent to begin with. He looks like he's not a good kid because of how serious he looks. In 2018, Nia Wilson was murdered on BART, the Bay Area transport. And this is what was posted. I think she was like 18 or 19. I don't remember. But this is the picture that was posted on the local news in Oakland that night. So this wasn't her first Facebook profile, or I think it was Facebook. She had lots of other cute pictures, her as a cheerleader, her with her friends, her with her sister, and they swiped through to find this photo of her with a cell phone case that looks like a gun, and this is what they posted on the news. And so the message that gives is, oh, well, maybe she deserved it. Maybe she was violent anyways. Maybe this was something drug related or gang related. Maybe she wasn't just an innocent girl who was getting off of the subway with her sister. Representation really, really matters. And this communicates stuff to us that we can't really help. It's not like we're looking at that and reasoning like, interesting. That's a cell phone case that looks like a gun. I wonder if she is into criminal activity. It's like, no, our brains do it automatically. Which is scary. This is really different from explicit bias. Explicitly, we can check it. Implicitly, we don't have access to it. But what blind spot does is that it details how it works. And a lot of it is just awareness. How do we become aware of what those biases are? And in chapter 3, the researchers are going to introduce a test that we can take to find out what our biases are. And it doesn't always feel good. You can be as woke as you want, you can be as aware as you want, and still contain these biases. So I'm going to be super upfront about the kind of biases that have come out from my testing. Sometimes biases against myself. For example, there's a test that's, women in leadership positions. And I test like male preferencing. I am a very outspoken feminist. I am a woman in leadership positions, and I still unconsciously prefer men who are in leadership positions. Do I actively believe that? Absolutely not. But I was raised seeing men in leadership positions, and so that's stuck in me, and I need to work against it. Another example of implicit.
To drop a letter to get the title.
Oh, I kind of talked over the beginning of it. This is just a BuzzFeed video that came out like 2 years ago that I thought was super interesting about just how this works within jobs and other leadership positions, and how simple these tiny, tiny acts of preferences can work and impact a life.
My name's Jose Zamora, and I had to drop a letter to get the title. Every morning I wake up, go on Craigslist, and apply to as many jobs, every job that I feel qualified for. About 50 to 100 a day for months. No phone calls, no emails, nothing. One day I just thought, what if I try Joe? Just remove the S in my name and maybe I can make some dollar signs. The Monday I decided to go from Jose to Joe. 7 days later, the next Monday, that's when all the responses started coming. That's when all the replies and the emails. The position is open. We want to meet with you. Call us back. I was applying for the same exact jobs, the exact same resume, the exact same experience, just a different name. Sometimes I don't even think people know or conscious or aware that they're judging, even if it's by a name, but I think we all do it all the time.
Okay. So there's lots of different artifacts of bias and how it works. Do I think that all of the people who were on the hiring committees of those jobs in the HR departments, do I think that they're racist? Outwardly, no. But I think that we live in a society, this was in LA, that has some really negative stereotypes of Latino men that have deep historical roots in a lot of years and years of oppression, that could maybe just sort of like make people choose somebody over Jose originally. It doesn't mean that they're not held accountable for that racist act. That is something explicit to actually act on that. But do I think they're aware? Probably not. And so race is the really easy one to see. And so I will be using more examples of that, especially because what's happening right now is related to race, but it is not just about race, gender, orientation, religion, economic class, age, ability or disability, health, mental health, weight, height, appearance, hometown, profession, all of these things we have biases around, and other people have biases of us. We have all been victims of implicit bias. We have also all used our implicit bias in a way that was isolating to others, whether or not we realize it. And so 3 terms we'll keep going back to are implicit bias, what I talked about today, microaggressions, which are those small reminders that you are seen as different or you are seen as lower. So going back to like what are you going to do with your career once you have kids? That would be considered a microaggression. Or every time that my boyfriend is given the check at a restaurant is a microaggression, a reminder of like, oh, you are the woman, therefore, you make less money, or et cetera, et cetera. And then actual aggressions where people are acting on their bias very knowingly. So as we engage in blind spot and with the rest of our text, we're going to be constructing double entry journals called DEJs. So between Mondays and Wednesdays, you guys are going to create your DEJs. You do have the readings ahead of time. They're all in the syllabus. So you could do this over the weekend. I just recommend doing this while you are writing. And so a double entry journal is also called a dialectic journal. This is supposed to, there we go. So we have that little photo. A dialectic journal it has the word dialectic in it, which is a word we don't use very often, but it means sort of seeking out the truth of things and pondering different solutions that you usually do sort of with a group. So anytime that you're in a conversation about a text or about an idea, that's called the dialectic. So I studied at Oxford for a couple semesters, and all of our classes were Socratic style classes where we would sit in a circle and we would just discuss and try to understand and get to the truth of something. So we were engaging in the dialectic, and a lot of schools use the same Socratic Oxfordian method. So a dialectic journal is kind of a record of that, but it is just you. It's you sort of pondering different ideas that you have while you're engaging in this text. And so this is an example of what a dialectic journal looks like. This is from one of my students in my 300 level business course. So I use these for all of my courses. It's a box, and it's a box with 2 columns and then a couple of different rows. And so as you're reading through, this person was reading through this journal article from the Journal of Internal Medicine, and they were trying to analyze it rhetorically. So everything that they pulled that was interesting to them, that they had a thought about, they put into this section. And then over here, they explain their reaction to it. So here they were just looking at the title of it, and then they were comparing it to this different article. And then here they were commenting on the specific age bracket. So it's a column that has information that you find interesting or that you have a thought about, and then that thought in the second column. So, did I not zoom that in? Hold up. Get the behind the scenes look. Oh, I didn't. You know what I'll do? I'll just go over into our dashboard. Pull up the prompt. Okay. So the prompt is up. The double entry journal is coming. It's coming. God, my internet is horrific. Okay. So as I said, these aren't real journals. It's just a way for us to pay attention as we're reading. It's also really nice because when you go to write your papers, which are going to use quotes from the text, you can start with your journals and look at the kinds of things that you found interesting. And that way you don't have to reread the text all over again to find stuff. It actually saves a ton of time. So I have an example up here, which we're going to go through, and I'll show you how I constructed it. I just read through the preface and pulled out stuff that was interesting to me. So the kinds of things that you can look for, quotes, passages that seem really important, or ideas that seem weird or interesting. There could be stuff you don't understand that you have questions about. It could be something that you are like, yeah, I feel this. Or you can hate what we're reading, and you can say that too. Things you don't disagree or things you disagree with are totally open for you to criticize. If you notice any interesting use of language, or if you're reading through them like, oh, this reminds me of this one text that we read in my sociology class, or oh, I watched this one, I don't know, Riverdale episode that had something to do with this. All of that's really important, that cross-contextual thinking where you're able to build bridges onto other things. That's analytical instead of just summarizing. What I don't want this to be is just a summary, because I don't need the spark notes of it. I've already read it. So everything that you're posting should be a reaction to it, or an idea that's stemmed from the writing. First person is fine, but make sure that you proofread. And so I'm going to go through how I constructed my example. Let's see if it makes me go. There we go. So I was reading the preface of Blind Spot, and right away I reread this section because I noticed something different every time I read. And it talks about the Greek word skotoma, which is a Greek word for darkness. And my thought was, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. I've never really made that connection. Like darkness we use when we're talking about knowledge too. So I wrote a little thing off the side. Like we use the ideas of light and dark when we're discussing knowledge. So we say somebody sees the light, or someone's ignorant is in the dark. And so that was just my little comment that as I was reading. Just a small thing. It doesn't matter, but this is communicating to me, oh, that person's paying attention and they're really thinking about the language that they're using. It doesn't have to be about the content at all. It could be about the way that the author is writing. So as I was reading through this section, I noticed how often they were using we. We encounter them so frequently, lodged in our minds, can influence our behavior. We remain oblivious. And I was thinking, oh man, that's really good of them to do, because if they were just saying your behavior lodged in your minds, it could feel a little accusatory, because this is really personal. Nobody likes to be told that there's something that exists in them that they don't have control over, and we don't need some big fancy researcher to tell us that we're not good people. So reading this, I'm like, yeah, that was a really good move from them. That seems super intentional. And so I wrote that. That they couldn't get away with saying you. It's not accusatory, and this makes us want to keep reading because they're kind of just like us. It's like having a conversation. So I wrote this as a response. And the next one, when I was reading through this thing about the word truthiness, and I love the sentence that people have a right to their own opinion, but not a right to their own facts. And it just like that sent me. And I was thinking about all of these things that are happening within political institutions right now. And I actually had quite a bit to say about that. And just how relevant this idea is to our current political climate. People just cherry pick parts of their own truth, like how Trump just redefined stuff, which politicians have been doing forever. It's not just him. And right now, how there's just these inventions of, oh, Antifa is the one starting protests when it's just regular people like you and me. I was reminded when Giuliani said that truth isn't truth, that there's alternative facts. So I just sort of listed all of these things that reminded me of. It just sort of sparked those and brought them back up. And so I listed this. That doesn't have to be amazing. Just if anything reminds you of another text, that's a great thing to record in here. It can also be personal. So reading this thing, there was a joke of I don't trust books, they're all fact, no heart. It actually reminded me of something I'm struggling with my mom right now. And I use my parents as examples a lot of times. I love them. They're wonderful people. They're very emotional in the way that they argue, where I am not so much. And so I kind of went for a little spill here of how facts and evidence doesn't work on my mom. She will only believe something if she connects to it emotionally, and how frustrating that is for me. And so I'm trying to talk to her a little bit more about what's going on with our the state of race in America right now, and bringing up a lot of historical factors. And she just doesn't listen. But I just gave her Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, which is really great. And it's about Black experience, written by a Black man, and it's written to his son. And so that got her, that she as a mom was like, oh, this is really that's amazing. It's a letter to his son. And so I think she's reading it literally just because of that. If it was a book with just facts, I don't think she'd do it. But I reflected here. So you can be personal. I mean, you don't have to share anything you don't want to. But if something reminds you of something you've witnessed or experienced or been thinking about, share that in here. And lastly, I really like their definition of the word of good people. And I thought that was a really nice thing to add at the end. And so I wrote that, just really short. I said I like this definition. It admits that good people mess up and are still learning. The goodness is in the intention. So that's definitely shorter than before. But I still explain myself. I didn't just say I like this definition. That's not an analytical thought. But I explain why I like it. It admits that good people mess up. They're still learning. That's good enough. There's no length requirement for this. All I'm looking for is a thoroughness, and that you're analyzing your thought rather than just stating it of this is good. I like this. This makes me feel weird. I don't know what this is. If you don't know what something is, or if something confuses you, explain why that is. I will gladly try to answer whatever questions you have in there. And so that's what my thing ends up looking like. So some of these I have direct quotes. Some of these I just take parts. Some of these I just sort of summarized or took a word that I wanted to respond to. You don't have to have direct quotes. You can paraphrase the idea. You can put page numbers if you want. You also don't have to. I'm not super picky. And so we have 2 writing labs a week. Monday's writing lab is just going to be a discussion based off of something that you talked about in your DEJ. So you'll notice by now that you've been put into a small group and you guys have your own discussion board, very similar to the board that we had the 2 boards we had last week. We're going to return to those all class boards on Thursday, or on Wednesday, excuse me. But for this one, you're just going to talk with a smaller group, makes it a little bit easier, and you're going to go through your DEJ, which is why I recommend doing it before Wednesday, and pull out something you thought was interesting. So maybe I will bring in. I might share the thing about my mom and just like literally copy and paste it, or I can condense it or rewrite it now that I'm saying it to people, or maybe I'll share this one, and then I'll go through and comment on each of my peers, either like, oh yeah, that's really interesting, or I agree, here's why, in the same way. So it works as kind of a small group conversation.